Alright, welcome back to another video everyone, and today we will be looking at the Scotch Gambit, and it's one of the highly recommended openings to play with white against e5, and it's an opening you can play in any format. You can play it in Blitz, Bullet, Rapid, Standard, anything, because it's just very adaptable and compatible to any type of situation, any terrain you play in. So let's just get into it. So you have e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, e takes d4, obviously forced. And here the Scotch game goes with knight takes d4, but we will be looking at bishop to c4, which indicates the beginning of the Scotch Gambit. Here black has actually, I think, 5 options, and I will be mainly 5 options. I'll be looking into all of them. So first is knight to f6. In this case, you play the move e5, and now if black does know this opening, he will play d5. But many players go back knight to g8, and that's something which is a very not recommended move. The best move for black, if you are black and you get into this situation, is push pawn to d5. And after bishop to b5, we have knight to e4, knight takes d4, bishop to d7, bishop takes c6. Again, now there are 2 options. Bishop takes c6 isn't a very famous option, like it's not played that much. After castle, we have bishop to c5, kind of comes to the same position. We have bishop to e3, castles, pawn to f3, knight to g5, and you just continue about with your game. Usually you have a move like f4. When he goes back to e4, you play knight to d2. After, I think, bishop to b6, easy exchange, and you can just continue your game. And with b takes c6, you have a similar type of game. You castle, bishop to c5, f3 again, knight to g5, f4, knight to e4, bishop to e3, bishop to b6, knight to d2, takes, and you can just continue the game. There's sometimes c5, and after knight to d3, you have d4, bishop to f2, and the position's completely fine. You both have equal amount of play coming up in the next few moves. So going back to so that's basically the knight f6 variation, and really he doesn't have any other options. I don't think anyone plays anything except bishop to d7. So again, you have 2 options. You can either go bishop takes e6 and b takes e6. b takes e6 is the most prominent and known variation which is played. But anyways, I don't think you barely encounter d5 because not many people play knight f6 in the first and the 4th move. The other variation, as you can see, there are 5 variations here. Let's look at bishop to e7. You take knight takes d4. You have d6, castle, knight to f6, knight to c3, castle, pawn to h3, because you're gonna be moving bishop to e3 really soon. Rook to e8, rook to e1, bishop to d7, bishop to f1. Now this is a very interesting move, and you'll see why it exactly plays this, because after bishop to f8, bishop to f4, knight to e5, we have followed by bishop to g3, bishop to g3, and here black just goes knight to g6, and white usually sometimes goes queen to d2. At least this was the game. But if you don't want to play bishop to f1, there's always another option of going immediately bishop to f4. The reason white plays bishop to f1 is to ever play g3 in the future, so he doesn't have to worry about the h3 pawn and then take his bishop out from g2. So that's the variation for that. And if you realize, in the Scotch Gambit, you kind of get an open Sicilian setup with the bishop c4 variation, and that's something you will see in another variation, which is pawn to d6, and that this is actually considered as the main line, other than bishop to c5, which we will be looking into. After pawn to d6, we have knight to d4, g6, knight to c3, bishop to g7, bishop to e3, and this is actually a very classic open Sicilian setup. After castle, queen d2, and you're also going for bishop to h6 as well as kind of a Yugoslav attack, going queenside castle. This is a very common setup in open Sicilian. Only difference is black c pawn still there. And that's the same thing with even g6 variation. You get the same position. If you see, you just get the same position. So that's that. And the last variation is bishop to c5, which is one of the most famous variations currently. And here you play the move c3. Well, what's the idea behind it? Well, for starters, you can't take d takes e3 because if bishop takes f7, so king takes f7, we have queen to d5 check. What about let's say something like knight to f6, which is the only other viable option. C takes d4, bishop to b4 check. You kind of get Gico piano vibes, or Gico piano, however you guys pronounce it. If you play a knight to c3, you get the similar move, but here the safe options just go bishop to d2, takes, d5, takes, queen b3, knight to a5 check, knight to c6, bishop to b5, and after bishop to d7, you can either castle and continue about your game. Now, you do have an isolated queen pawn, so that's something you gotta keep into consideration before you go and exchange pieces that you don't want to. So try to make use of your rooks with these open files and the semi-open file, because that's what isolated queen pawns help doing. Try to keep your pieces on the board, don't go exchanging them too quickly. That's one of the suggestions I have. And if you don't feel comfortable playing with an isolated queen pawn, well, then you don't need to worry. Here you can just go with the knight c3 variation, which followed by castle. I think this is the move. And after d5, you can just continue with the normal Gico piano, bishop a3, after d takes e4, rook e1. If you're a Gico piano player, this is something that you should be knowing. So you can always continue with this if you don't want to go with the isolated queen pawn option. So anyways, guys, that was the Scotch Gambit, and if anything wasn't clear, you guys can always comment down below. I will be looking at the comments as usual. And if you have any problem with any variation, you can always write it down in the comments. If you have any suggestions, you can also write that down in the comments. And do hit the like and subscribe button. It means a lot to me, and I will see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.